Hello and welcome to the Limey and the Yank. I'm Andrew. I'm here with my proverbial sparring partner, Stan. And last time we were just too peaceful. We just found ourselves agreeing too much. But we know that's not what you want. We know you want war. We know you want blood. We know that you want me to hold Stan's severed, bleeding head at the top of the Colosseum as I scream, "Are you not entertained?" So today we're going to talk about James Randi, and I'm going to undermine myself and say I don't know as much about him as Stan, so I might get my ass kicked on this one. James Randi, your thoughts?
Okay, I'm going to go broad top and then tie it all back into James Randi. My thoughts on James Randi stem from my thoughts on professional skeptics, particularly ex-magician ones, in general. I have a very, very generally low amount of respect for professional skeptics. I think that it's a kind of a racket. I'll give you an example of why I think that. When I was a Catholic, my dad worked for a Catholic diocese. He produced one of their radio shows on EWTN Radios, this huge Catholic radio station. He was the producer for one of the shows. And during that time, there was all of this hysteria in the Catholic Church about a book called fucking hell. Dan Brown, what the fuck was that book called?
The Da Vinci Code.
The Da Vinci Code. Thank you. Over the Da Vinci Code. A lot of hysteria over the Da Vinci Code. And, oh my God, it's going to lead the faithful away. And this is against church teaching. Like, no shit. What? Of course, yeah. We all know that, idiot. And there was all of this hysteria over that. For, I guess, is it worth? Does everybody know what this thing is about? Like, Da Vinci Code.
Well, the Da Vinci Code, in my understanding, was that Leonardo da Vinci knew about the bloodline of Christ and left clues to it in his artwork.
That's correct. It's national treasure except Catholicism, and the crux of the movie is that Jesus has a living descendant today, and the church was actively working to cover it up, to cover that up. And so there was all this hysteria in the church, and we had to talk about it a lot on the radio. And there were all of these books started cropping up written by Catholic authors called the Da Vinci Hoax and the Da Vinci Fraud and the Da Vinci Deception, and they all said exactly the same thing. And they all felt very, very strongly that they needed to point out that a work of fiction was a work of fiction. And so it created this little cottage industry of authors that, but for the thing that they were so outraged about, wouldn't have a career. In my opinion, anybody who is reduced to having to write books telling people that Uri Geller doesn't really bend spoons is in a little cottage industry riding the coattails of the people that they're outraged about. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a career. And I don't think that we need books about how Uri Geller doesn't really bend spoons. I think the average person could probably figure that out. I don't think that we need a little cottage industry pointing out the obvious. I don't think we need a little cottage industry saying that lack of rationality is causing all these problems, and so buy my books about how Sylvia Browne doesn't get predictions right. I think that James Randi is a bottom feeder, and that's pretty much it. So, I get what you're saying. So I have two things to say about that. Hold on, somebody's very angry getting out of their car behind me here. What is this? Uh-oh. Oh, never mind. They're angry at somebody else.
I thought we were going to get the live recordings of you in your first kung fu fight in 10 years.
We just might. There's some assholes taking out the parking yelling about Uri Geller.
It's Uri Geller. Okay. He's come to get you.
It is. He's after me.
He is psychic after all.
He's bending my fingers. Okay, where was I? Oh, 2 points about that. Oh God, let me organize my thoughts. that threw me for a second. Let me organize my thoughts here. George Corpse Grinder Fisher, the lead singer of Cannibal Corpse, was once asked about the correlation between his music and violence or murders, and glorifies murder and all that. And his very quick answer was, if you're capable of that, then you're fucked anyway. My opinion of somebody who would believe that Uri Geller could really bend the spoons, if they really deeply believe that, then they're fucked anyway. No amount of reading James Randi is going to change anybody like that. He seems to me to be, and by the way, I think Randi sincerely finds people like Geller and Sylvia Browne to be a problem. I don't think he's being disingenuous. It may have sounded like that. That I don't think, but I'll come to that in a minute. I think that leads to a bigger problem. But anybody who would he seems to go after the people, sort of like Dawkins says he was trying to find the people who were on the fence about whether or not supernatural things could be real anyway, and that's stupid. Then in that case you can't. In my view, you can't look at something like Uri Geller or Sylvia Browne and then point out that they're frauds and then say, see, the supernatural isn't really real and it's all just a bunch of fakes. I don't think you can make that one-to-one connection between those two things, and I think he tries to. The second point that I would make is, I don't think he's being disingenuous. I think he's allowing his irritation with people like Uri Geller and Sylvia Browne to override his sense of being reasonable. I was going to say reason, but it's not how we normally use that word now. To override his reasonableness and to override his common sense and to blow it out of proportion into this much bigger some kind of a big problem when it actually isn't. That's another issue that I have with him and a lot of professional skeptics and a lot of other kinds of people that I listen to on the internet today. That right there, that phenomenon of thinking something really is bad and then allowing your own irritation with it to blow it up out of proportion into this big thing that it actually isn't, I think that's a fucking epidemic today.
Well, I'm gonna respond to the thing where you quoted Corpse Grinder. And specifically what you said, like if someone sincerely believes that Uri Geller can bend spoons with their mind, then they're fucked anyway. I really don't agree with that, because like I'm not going to comment for America, but I live in a country that is very superstitious, and people like don't want to walk under ladders and shit like that. And there's an epidemic of black cats not being adopted because they're believed to be cursed. Like, I don't think that casually believing in something means that you're fucked. Like, because I got you to watch, I tactically got you to watch Darren Brown's Messiah.
Yes.
I don't think when Darren Brown, for those who don't know, Darren Brown's Messiah, Darren Brown is a British musician who did a documentary in which he posed as various like people involved with the supernatural. Like, and one of these things, he posed as a medium, and he read the crowd, and he did it using the usual medium tricks, but to see if this other medium would endorse him, because he said that if they do endorse him, and he of course is not someone with powers, then there's a problem there. And he obviously debriefed the people after the fact and apologized if it caused them distress and asked permission to use it in the documentary and stuff like that. I don't think those people are fucked, and that they will definitely believe in any of this sort of stuff. I think they're people that are being misled, and I think that this is more tenuous, because I don't think that Randi's book is as much to do with this, but I think it's important to have figures like James Randi. And Darren Brown goes about it in a very different way. But I think it's important to have people like them, because if you allow charlatans to claim supernatural powers that they don't have, they lead astray the desperate people. Not necessarily the deluded, but the desperate. not people that would dig in their heels and go, no, there is definitely something, but I have to believe in something. But people who like want to believe in something because life's hard, and I think that a lot of these psychics prey upon that, and that's why I think a guy like James Randi is important. I don't necessarily think that it. I don't think you should be so rigid with your skepticism that you're like none of this could possibly. But I think stuff like the $1 million challenge is perfectly reasonable, and I think what Darren Brown does is perfectly reasonable as well. I think people that claim powers should be put to task because I think it's harmful, and I think James Randi thinks it's harmful as well, and that's why I would back him up, particularly with Uri Geller, because I can't remember the decade, but this was in a time in which Uri Geller was generally thought to actually be psychic.
Well, but how much was he really though? He was on the Tonight Show, for God's sake. I don't think he was an act. I think in every case he was treated as an act. Even when the show where James Randi stuffed up his whole thing and made him look foolish was on the Tonight Show. He was a part of popular entertainment. I don't think I don't have any statistics or anything to back this up. My general feeling is, if he's on the Tonight Show, I don't think a lot of people were taking him that seriously. I do. Okay, let me address some of the points that you made. When I say they're fucked anyway, I don't mean that they're like bad people or whatever. The people that are you used a very good word, which was misled. We'll take the misled people, put them in a separate category for a minute. I'm talking about the people who are like, no, aliens exist. Anybody who tells me they don't just believes the government and blah blah. Okay, well then fuck you. Then go and think that and stay out of my business or whatever. That's kind of thing I'm talking about. People that are genuinely misled. Yes, one of the things that Randi did that I really liked was when he exposed Peter Popoff. Peter Popoff was a televangelist who was using a wireless earpiece to his wife was feeding him information when he was doing his
Hot reading.
And stuff, and he was saying, "Oh, you have cervical cancer or whatever," and he was saying all these things, and they were like, "Oh my God, this guy must be the real deal," and he was being fed information, and James Randi personally exposed that, and that's good. He should be exposed because fuck that guy, and I watched him, right up to and after he was exposed, but so. Here I was about to say, how could anybody look at that and not know that it's fake? But there are people, as you say, who are misled. That's fine, but we don't need that. Okay, let me organize my thoughts here. With Randi in particular, belief in the supernatural does not necessarily lead to that. In fact, rarely does it, I think. Belief in the supernatural. That kind of ties into his $1 million challenge too, which I think the $1 million challenge is fucking stupid because you're assuming that these abilities, if they existed, but let me just disclaim here, I don't believe they do. But if they did, this is the kind of thing that we wouldn't expect to conform to like a scientific test anyway. It wouldn't be that specific to begin with. I don't think anyway, based on what I know about it. But it's this idea that not being quote unquote rational in the sense that you hear in the internet skeptic and atheist circles, and that a lack of skepticism leads to all of these problems that I don't think they do. I think we're talking about two different things. I don't think that like a religious person who believes in God and goes and worships, and a guy who thinks that he was abducted by aliens, we're talking about two different things. I don't think we're on the same subject. The thing that they have one thing in common in that they believe in something that isn't demonstrable, but I think that's a very shallow link between the two.
Well, I'm just like, so it seems to me like a lot of your issue, because the book with Uri Geller has been a big focal point of the conversation, but I feel like that is just something that put him on the map. as a skeptic,
Well, let me
as
make
opposed
one point
to
about that. Let me make one little point about that real quick. The reason that gets my backup is the fact that I agree with you that mediums and those actual frauds who do prey upon people, I agree with you, are detestable. But even more detestable is the person who rides their coattails into fame. I mean, but for the fact that Randy was doing all this stuff, that stands to there's a pretty good chance that less people would have heard of somebody like Uri Geller. Um, and I don't think that drawing attention to it, even trying to draw negative attention to it, is really the solution in that case. And it occurred to me when I was thinking of Sylvia Brown just then. Uri Geller was on the Tonight Show, and Sylvia Brown was on fucking Montel Williams. Like, how seriously does anybody really take this?
well, I mean, James Randi is not on the same level of fame as Uri Geller. Like I have this thing that I call it the uncle test, which is because my uncle is the closest thing to a layman you can get on any subject. My
Mm.
uncle knows who Uri Geller is.
Mm.
I have serious doubts he knows who James Randi is. So
Oh, sure.
I
No,
don't
I
think
just meant that. Yeah, and that's to be the case anyway. I mean, but it's not necessarily that he's as famous as Uri Geller, but he's using Uri Geller's fame in a sense, not cynically. But I remind you,
I think he
I think
is,
he's
but
sincerely.
I don't think he would. I don't think he brings more attention to the people that he has criticised, because typically, in order to get criticism from him, you need to be a fairly established figure to begin with. Like James Randi
I don't
doesn't
think
go
that any
down
of
to the
this would have
local
ended up on.
mediums
I
and
don't think any of this would have ended up on like CNN. They had these. You can watch him and Sylvia Brown's little shithead agent got into it on CNN, and I certainly, I'll say this much: I never in my life would have heard of Uri Geller were it not for James Randi. I'm one person. That doesn't mean anything, but maybe it does. I don't know. But I never in my life had heard. The only time I heard about Uri Geller is when I was in James Randi.
well, keep in mind that Uri Geller is a big enough name that there's a trio of Pokemon that are based off of him.
You're kidding.
And I'm not talking
What are the
recently.
Pokemon?
I'm not talking recently. I'm talking way back from the very first game. There's Abra, which evolves into Kadabra, which evolves into Alakazam, and they're sort of little alien. I guess
Oh
look a
shit!
bit
They've
like
got
kangaroos. The
spoons, don't
spoons.
they?
Yep, the ones with the spoons.
Oh fuck! You're right.
I
Okay. Okay.
he's a big enough name that there is that Pokemon, a Japanese game, mind you,
Mm. Mm.
like that they based them off of him, and the spoons of which they they use to channel their psychic energy.
Mm.
Like he's a bit. I think he's a far bigger name than you're maybe giving him credit for. When people in
You could be
Japan,
right about that.
yeah,
Touche, touche.
yeah,
I may stand corrected on that. Maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree about the
yeah,
amplification.
yeah. Like I don't think
Oh
you're.
wait, we're supposed to be arguing. No,
Yeah,
fuck you. This,
yeah.
but for James Randi, there would be no Uri Geller.
Yeah. I mean, I just don't think that James Randi brings many more eyes to a person like Yuri Geller. I think
You could be right.
people that take his $1 million challenge, maybe he brings more attention to them, but they're accepting a challenge that he has put out. Um, so,
Mm.
in that same vein, you could say that they're riding his coattails.
And that's in on that show. Yeah, they definitely.
Yeah, and I see no problem with something like the $1 million challenge, because when you say like, how do we know that these would even work that way? Well, the truth is we don't know if someone's psychic or magical abilities would work in a normal way. But if someone claims to have powers, then they should be able to demonstrate these powers. And
Sure.
I think that I mean, we can never know everything in certainty, but science is about reasonably assuming based on what we do know. And what we do know is that scientific method and scientific testing of repeated testing under controlled conditions has worked for pretty much everything we've ever tried to do. So it only logically makes sense to use the scientific method to prove the supernatural, because after all, what can be supernatural? If something exists, then it is fundamentally a part of nature, even if it's something we don't understand. Like the
Ooh.
forces of
Ooh.
gravity and forces like gravity and wind resistance, they make sense to us now. Things like the change in seasons, they make sense to us now. But god damn it, 1,000 years ago in Celtic Britain, they thought that was magic.
Yep.
And I don't see why stuff that we think, if someone does have like what we would today consider supernatural powers, I see no reason, as to what we know about the world now, why they would in any way not be able to hold up to scientific scrutiny in the same way that the changing colour of the trees, which was a magical thing that we didn't understand. Like, I mean, I go back to the Celts because, I mean, I'm English and it's what I know. Celts
Sure.
believed that gods and spirits magically changed the colour of the trees. Photosynthesis wasn't a thing they understood. To them, it was magic. And coming from a country with a rich sort of folkloric history of spirits and magic, and like I pull the culture card a lot, I realise, but you know, it's what I know. Like
It's fine.
I come from a country where spirituality and magic, while not really believed in broadly anymore, is the very backbone of our history and culture.
Mhm.
And anything that you couldn't explain, you used to believe was magic. They used to believe that the sun rising and
Yes.
falling was magic, and I don't see why
Mhm.
it would be any different to people taking the James Randi test. They
Let
could have
me
a
offer
power,
a
but it could be scientifically explained.
sure. Let me offer a how do I want to phrase this? Let's assume that materialism is correct. All that exists is, as you said, part of nature. What would it be like if there were something non-nature that um, didn't operate in the same way? That's the question I have before my mind.
Well,
And
can you sort of phrase it again?
sure, okay, even if materialism were true,
Hmm.
how would it work if it wasn't? Let's assume. I guess what I mean is, let's assume for the sake of argument that there is some kind of something exists that is non-nature, outside of nature, operates. Um, this is the kind of distinction that I find helpful when I'm trying to entertain the thought of the supernatural in a meaningful way. When I say to you, triangle, you know what I'm talking about. Even though I didn't tell you what kind of triangle or how big or what color, everything in nature is particular of some size, shape, and color. There are nothing but particulars in nature. Um, there are no generalities in nature. There are no concepts in nature. So when I say car or tree, fence or house, you immediately have some picture before your mind of what I'm talking about, even though what I'm talking about isn't in nature. The concept of triangle or car or shape is not in nature.
I don't
The
agree.
Okay, go ahead.
There,
Show me triangularity and go ahead.
man-made does not mean not a part of nature. And as well as
How
that,
do
I
you
don't.
mean?
Okay, you know what a car is because we built the damn things, and you know what, and that goes for houses, and you
Well,
know,
no, I
and
know what is common. I know what is common to all cars.
well, that's
It's not so much that I know what a car is. I know what is common to all cars and what is common to all trees, even though there's nothing but individual instances of them.
well, in this individual instance of a car, say the car that you're recording in now,
Mm,
that physically exists.
sure.
It's a part of nature. It might not have been formed by nature in a conventional way. Humans made it. Like a bunch of people made your car or made machines that made your car. That car does not exist
Hmm.
without nature. Henceforth, that car is a part of nature.
Yes, but the concept triangularity doesn't exist in nature.
But that's because it's a merely a visual on our part. We see a
How
three-sided track and
visual
we
is
use
it?
it.
I didn't tell you anything about I only said triangularity. That which is common to all triangles, which also don't exist as such in nature as a concept. What I'm getting at, this is maybe this is a little bit outside of, this is an interesting philosophical conversation in itself, but it's not the point I was making. Maybe I can sort of come at this a different way without opening a whole other can of worms. Is that fair?
Well, let me quickly pitch something to you.
Sure.
Because this is the easiest way I can explain my perspective.
Okay.
Okay, so you've got an ocean. Everything in so in this bit of ocean, there's only fish, and these fish, they are part of the ocean. So the ocean is nature. To fish, the ocean is nature. A polar bear is not a fish, and a polar bear does not live in the ocean. But when the polar bear goes into the ocean, it's there and it's part of that nature. It exists in their world, in their nature. But it's not a fish, and it's not ordinarily a part of their world. Like the polar bears swim, of course, but the fact of the matter is that you could be a fish and live your entire life and not see a polar bear. The ocean's a big place. Just because that thing is an outlier, or just because it is to us maybe unusual, to the fish certainly unusual, that doesn't mean it's not in that ocean, and that doesn't mean that it's not part of nature in that moment. So for me, something supernatural, say ghosts, even if I can't, and I can't, if a ghost appeared before me now and said hello and maybe sat down and joined us in this podcast, I would not scientifically be able to explain or materialistically be able to explain why he's here. But the fact that he's here should indicate a materialistic reasoning for that, even if I can't do it. Doesn't mean that someone else can't do it.
I totally get what you're saying. You're kind of onto the same track. Interestingly, you're kind of on the same path as where I'm going with the supernatural, in a way. Before I go down to my point, I will ask you, just because the philosopher in me thinks it's interesting, what part of nature is my sense of irritation at James Randi? What physical part of nature is my sense of irritation?
I mean, I would imagine it would be chemicals.
Huh.
Your brain works through chemicals. Every emotion that you feel is charged by a chemical reaction, and we know this because when you feel angry, there is a chemical reaction in the brain that corresponds with that emotion, and in the same way that when you feel happy, there is another one, dopamine. Now, you could make the argument that you can make the argument that the chemical release is because you feel that, but there's no real logical reason to believe that to be so, other than as a thought experiment. Logically, the chemical changes your state. Now,
right, but no, hold on, no, realize you are forced to use two different qualified terms are chemicals and state. We're talking about two different things, and this seems trivial, but I think it's important. Let's say that there's a scientist that's recording my brain chemicals as I go throughout my life, and the scientist is asked to report everything that he's experiencing, and I'm asked to report everything that I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to talk about how annoyed I am and everything that I've been talking about in this podcast with James Randi. He's going to start talking about my chemicals. We're talking about two different things. There is at least an analytical difference between what's going on with him and what's going on with me. And that may seem trivial, but I don't think it is. I think that's a very subtle indication that there is a real distinction between those two things, and that the chemical element is a necessary but not sufficient condition to explain my experience.
I don't know how much I agree, because I'd say in this discussion, I would say that you're the one asking questions. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I know more than you, because well, I probably don't. But you're the one asking me questions, and I'm attempting to provide the answers. And when you get an answer, you ask me a question about that answer. Now, to me, that kind of backs up my point, because obviously, as you know, I'm a materialist and you're not.
Sure.
But to me, and also I'm not a great philosophical thinker by any means. I haven't studied it and I haven't really read it. But
You're doing quite well, actually, I would say.
To me, as I'm the one who is answering the questions with what scientific knowledge I know, which is not immense, I'm still the one providing a form of answer. Now, the reason I'm not, what's the word when you're not a materialist?
You know what? I've been trying to let's say non-material, immaterialist.
Okay.
Let's use that one. I've been trying to figure that out too. I don't really know.
So the reason I believe in the material is because I, as a person, can only use what I know to explain things. And yes, in asking questions, you will discover more. But I don't think, by and large, people that believe in the immaterial have made many strides in actually proving or quantifying their beliefs in any way.
Oh, you're quite right about that. You're quite right about that.
And you see, that's to me why I say this as I've spent 35 minutes talking about this with you, but that's to me why I don't think the immaterial bears much thought. Like, I guess I can relate a lot to that speech in The Revenant where Tom Hardy's talking about his father and says if he couldn't grow it, kill it, or eat it, he just plain didn't believe in it. It's not that I don't necessarily, I mean, I don't believe in ghosts, but it's not like I wouldn't be open to it. It's just, again, to me, is that same skeptical mindset of, well, I need something to go on. And
sure, and it has no practical usefulness. And this is what I try to get across, or tried past tense when I was doing the stand and stand stuff, and especially in web forums and stuff. This was the point that I tried to get across to believers. The materialist case is the easier case. We know as much as with as much certainty as we possibly can that there is a physical world that operates according to these rules and constants that we there's no question, except for this really, really vague, very hypothetical, what if I'm a brain in a vat kind of thing. In our day-to-day experience, there's no question of what we're experiencing. It's as familiar to, it's the only thing that's familiar to us. The supernatural, belief in the supernatural, God, or the immateriality of the intellect, which I think is the case. Anything like that, the case for it is very slight. It's very evasive. I think it would be that if it were true, but nevertheless, it is very slight and very evasive, and it's very uncertain. We can't know it with nearly as much certainty as we can the physical world, and that would also be true even if it were true. So what I would say, I think I try just to caution myself and everyone else to not to think of the supernatural as, what if there was this completely batshit, balls to the wall, totally radically different from anything that we know about thing that actually existed, because how could you ever possibly answer a question like that? When I try to think about the supernatural, what if there is more than just the material? What if there's something other than the material that exists? How could we know it through material means? I don't think we could. How could we know it at all? When I try to think about those questions, if on the occasions that I think it's an important question, which I'm like you, I rarely do as well, I try to think about it like this. And this is maybe a better example than I gave in the beginning. there is the argument between, or the debate between free will and determinism is misunderstood. And by the way, I'm borrowing heavily from Adler on this, so I may be plagiarizing him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's deeply misunderstood on both sides. It's commonly thought of as an argument between determinism and indeterminism. The meaning just absolutely the a brain that operates according to the laws of physics, which are on autopilot, so to speak, just like everything else, and a brain that is dependent on nothing, an intellect that is dependent on nothing, which is an incorrect assessment of the controversy. What the free will determinism controversy is between a brain that is dependent on the laws of physics and only works according to the laws of physics, which are essentially predetermined or determined according to that law, and an intellect that operates according to its own rules and constants that aren't like the material, separate and apart from, but nevertheless abide by a set of rules and constants that are merely different. That's a helpful distinction to me. If there was a supernatural, and this is why I say I think you were onto something when you're talking about the fish and the ocean, all that. Yes, it is something that could be understood and quantified only very operating according to a different set of rules and principles than we normally experience in the physical. And I think if there's anything at all to be said about the supernatural and the question of the supernatural, I think it has to be met on those terms and not, you just never know, be open-minded, maybe there's psychics and blah, blah, blah. Does that make sense? A little bit?
Well, you see, so can you get why bring this back round to James Randi?
Sure.
Why I'm in favour of said $1 million challenge?
Yes, actually, and yes, I do. Yes, I can. And the $1 million challenge, I will go so far as to say, I think it's very good at demonstrating anybody who tells you that these supernatural things do operate according to these things, and the science is just deceiving you, and there's this other thing that can be discovered by science that's all new agey or whatever. Anybody who tells you that is full of shit. Any religious person who says that they have 100% of the truth is completely full of shit. Anybody who doesn't preface their supernatural or religious beliefs with a million caveats, just like the one that I made about how we're talking about something different and intangible, and that you can't quite get your head around the way that you can in science. Anybody who doesn't preface their statement with that is probably full of shit. So yes, absolutely.
Well, for me, with skeptics, here's a thing, and I think we might agree on this. I work with another actress, and she's Polish, and like most Poles are, she's Catholic.
Yeah.
And we were just talking, and it came up about a religion. I said, "Oh, so you're Catholic?" And she's, "Yes." I said, "What sort of Catholic?" And she says, "What do you mean? I mean, do you mean as in you'd say you're Catholic, or do you believe that God created the world in 7 days?" And she said, "I believe that God created the world in 7 days." And I said, "Oh, fair enough." She said, "Do you?" I said, "No, I don't." And she went, "Fair enough." And that was the end of the conversation. We've never talked about religion since. I
Good.
don't see the benefit. What changes in her life if I have a discussion with her about why I don't believe in God? If she doesn't believe in God after that discussion, oh well. Like, oh, look, she doesn't believe in. Oh well done. You've deconverted someone, and I don't see the merit in that, because for me, I'm more interested in what someone does believe than what they don't believe.
Sure.
So for me, at least when it comes to discussions of religion, I don't like people that try and push their religion and try to convert you to their religion. But in
Yeah.
the same way, I don't really like when atheists, because the atheists, I think, have a mindset that they're trying to help someone by enlightening them about why their religion is not real. But I don't think generally People live and die by their religion. At the end of the day, it's an opinion on something that none of us will ever know the answer to properly anyway. I see no reason to believe in a religion logically, and I think that Christian apologetics is largely, well, completely bollocks. I think it's all a load of shit. But at the same time, I don't feel the need to press my own belief and thoughts and opinions on religion on someone else. So for me, I think that's like maybe I'm slightly off topic, but for me, there's a difference between a skeptic who tries to point out when something is harmful and when something is not. I don't think that belief in a creator is harmful. I think it's kind of dumb, but I don't think it's harmful. I think it, yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially about the. I get really, really suspicious of people who assert that whole conversation between you and your friend. I think is a great one because at the end of the day, that's all it needs to. I'm of the same. I used to go in and try to um, sort of do a revival of the sort of intellectual philosophical arguments, not for Yahweh or Allah or any specific
mm,
god or gods, but for why we might think that that the universe requires a creative being in the first place. I used to go in and try to do a revival of that. I don't really do that anymore. For people who are religious in good, no pun intended, people who are religious in good faith, where this is a part of their life, they're using this as a means to try to make themselves people, because there's a lot of good ethics in a lot of different religions. There are a lot of good. They are ethics that one might hold even if they weren't religious, but nevertheless they're present. And people who I get so irritated with atheists and people who try to do that deconversion where they say, well, what about what the Bible says that slavery is okay? And these people don't have any idea what they're talking about because that isn't an important aspect of the religion to them. And it's good that it isn't. They are applying to this religion their own, in most cases, I think, their own already good sense of ethics. It builds upon, if you're a good person, the religion is going to build upon your already good ethics. If you're a shit person, then it's going to build upon shit ethics, and you're going to take that stuff from it like
yeah.
anything else. But I don't really feel the need anymore to try and give this sort of here's one reason why one might think that the universe requires a creator, because when it comes to people like the sort of militant I must deconvert people because religion is harmful people, my answer to them used to be, oh, you must not have read Aristotle or Adler. My answer to them now is, I don't owe you an explanation. I don't owe you anything. I, I don't answer to you. I don't have to answer your questions. I don't have to justify myself to you. I'm doing just fine. If there's anything in my behavior that you can find that's bad, tell me. Otherwise, leave me alone. And I that's kind of a recent thing.
So to close up this episode, which is twice as long as the one that came before it, what's your closing thoughts on James Randi and the supernatural?
I think James Randi has made a career out of much to do about nothing and blowing his own personal irritations out of proportion to make them seem like a lot bigger problems than they actually are. I consider him, in my own personal opinion, take it for what you will, a bottom feeder in that sense. And that's about all I can say about him. The supernatural, I am open in the way that I said that in the way that I described earlier to the supernatural existing and not being readily apparent through scientific investigation, but through other kinds of investigations. And I don't think that a lot of people think.
Okay, fair enough. I think we may have dropped off again, but that's okay because I can just record the outro separate.
No, I think we're good.
Okay,
I
cool.
think we're good.
Okay, well, my closing thoughts are like I don't necessarily disagree that James Randi. I mean, I can see your perspective that he's a bottom feeder, but for me, I think I think what he does in calling out people that are charlatans is right, because I do think there are people that are misled, and I think that if someone's being misled and someone's knowingly misleading people, then I think they deserve to be called out for it.
Right on that.
Okay. Thank you for listening to this longer episode. Join us next week when we will be talking about blank. And that'll be the end as well. That's I'm just going to say
Oh, yeah.
blank.
Blank. I love it. I love it.